All right, we are live.
Salvete, hello everybody. This is the English follow-up to the Latin. My mouth feels weird. Maybe sounds weird to you all. This is the English follow-up to the Latin video we just posted, which you can also go see. We'll include the link there, which deals with, or which suggests some possible classroom uses of our recently published videos with this sort of show and tell, what's in your bag activities, both uses of the videos themselves and uses of, if you don't want to use the videos, the activities that are demonstrated in those. So we'll just chat a little, have a little round table about that. Gus is actually, most of you are probably hard at work teaching kids Latin or doing some other job. Gus is at work. Jason and I happen to be free, even though it's Monday morning. So I don't know if you're watching this right now because the video will be saved as well. But welcome if you're listening in. What's that noise by you, Jason?
It's I'm hanging out in a coffee shop because it's very early for me on Monday morning. I was working late last night, so.
Very nice. We're glad you can make it.
I do have to point out that there's somebody waiting in line who's wearing a sweatshirt that says Aqua Aurea on the bar. Yeah, right. Yeah, we'll get that swag up at some point. But
very nice.
I find myself going around town, just like seeing random Latin. Like I posted something on Instagram on a Jeep. It said "Aude aliquid dignum."
I saw a kid. I had a kid at school the other day that had a T-shirt that said "Ecce Bromani." Bromani. I thought this was pretty funny.
Isn't there some like news show out or something?
Romans. Romans. It's hilariously awful or awfully hilarious.
Yeah.
Well, so to these videos, what do you want to recap real quick? Kind of the content or the activity of the videos, and then we can talk about applying it to different levels and different kinds of activities you can do.
Gus, while we have you, you want to run through that?
No, I mean,
just the actual activity demonstrated in the video.
Yeah.
No, I mean, again, I think I caught the very end of y'all's conversation because, as you said, I'm at school, and I know that one of the values, and it's this way, the problem with any spoken Latin in the classroom is the temptation to come in and say, okay, what's going on? Let's just talk in Latin. How you doing? And the ability to have a conversation about just anything that pops up is, very quickly for most of us, you get into the sorry Charlie levels.
Well, and that happens in English, right? If you go in and say just talk, everybody just stares at each other.
It's that old trope of, your dad, like, hey, Dad, we never talk. Okay, let's talk. What do you want to talk about? Well, I don't know. So having, as I think what I heard you say, Justin, when I was watching a little bit of the broadcast, when you said that, this activity, because it has I think the phrase you used was finis certus. It has a sort of a finite end, a certain ending. It puts students in a well-designed box that they can do a lot of things in, but it's not a conversation about everything. So any activity, if it's well designed, is actually pretty small, is very finite, I think.
And I think you hit on one of the misconceptions when we talk about teaching Latin in the target language. I think there's a notion that us radical Latin speakers are just going into the class and just free-forming the whole thing. Like, we don't plan anything and all this stuff. And exactly the opposite is true, like you say, Gus. That it needs to be very tightly structured. And I think this is where a lot of teachers who are new to the approach can maybe go astray and become frustrated. They, like we say, they just come in and they just try to start talking, and either they don't feel confident in their own speaking ability, or they're overestimating exactly what the students are going to be able to do, and so then these things aren't as successful maybe as they'd like. And so by putting some parameters around it, one helps the teacher, right? Especially for like the "What's in my bag" video. At the beginning of the year, that's something that every student in the classroom is able to do. like you say, keeps them from going astray. You know, it's something that they can talk about and that they can feel, they can start to build confidence.
Yeah. So that's maybe a positive and encouraging comment for people that got some breaking up or freezing there, but that's maybe a positive or encouraging comment for teachers that that this kind of activity is highly scriptable and really easy to prepare for and to kind of know where it's headed and to control where it's headed. So if you recall, the first in the first video we demoed an activity where Jason had an item hidden in his bag. It was goofy because it happened to be a clear plastic bag, but Jason had an item hidden, and Gus and I had to guess what it was, sort of 20 questions style. You still with us, Jason?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay,
going a little laggy, so just keep talking.
No problem. Yeah, so we're talking about the first activity where Jason had an item hidden and Gus and I were guessing, and this is a great place for just a really simple range of vocab, size, big, small, color, maybe some maybe material if you want to get into that, really basic uses. Where Jason, you were talking in the Latin video earlier, especially with the lower levels, just keep it at that factual level, and that aligns with, if you care about this, that aligns with both ACTFL's and ACL and other classics organizations standards for classical language learning. Keeping it concrete like that. Jason, do you have recommendations for kind of scaling that activity up a little bit with?
Yeah, actually, I went into UNM like last year and I was talking about this sort of thing, and I did a very similar kind of item talk, if you want to call it that, as the activity. Like,
capital
when you think about an element
item talk.
Yeah. Trademark. If you think about it, in elementary school, like, why do you do show and tell in elementary school? One is personal, right? It engages the kids because they're talking about their own thing, and then it just gives them speaking practice. So, on Laura Gibbs's site, Mille Fabulae et Una, all these Aesop's fables. There's one about the crow and the urn. The crow is trying to get the water out of the urn. And so you take like a simple item like, a water bottle, and that can be a good setup for the story that you're going to read. And, you do the same thing: color, size, material, what's in it. Scale the conversation up. Why do you have this? Is it an old bottle? Is it a new bottle? Have you taken trips with it? Why carry a bottle around instead of buying plastic water bottles? What's the impact on the environment of reusing bottles and things like that? So even a simple item, you can really scale the conversation up.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's what you just said there is important, because you can talk for a very long time about the size of the bottle and the type of the bottle, and do you have it, and does this other person want it, and can you give it to him? You can do all of that stuff, but then you brought up these examples at the top of the pyramid of well, what's the impact of this bottle? I mean, there's a lot of opportunities inside of an activity to do fundamentally the same activity with 4 different levels of classes or students or experience levels, and that's really good. I was going to make the point that
go ahead.
That the thing is, we keep saying it's scripted, and it is, in the sense that we know where we're generally going, but that's the way really any good conversations are. And if you see some of like the best comedians, that they seem so random, or even improv comedy, that only comes about because they've thought through it and they've built themselves such a nice box that they can play and do anything within. And and that's what teaching is. It's really a lot of improv, but it's within a very tightly self-controlled box, which these activities become, I think.
The other side of that, though, is that you want to provide students room to direct the conversation, right? Because we don't always know 100% what students want or need. Like, we may come in to class, you know, I'm going to talk about this, and the students aren't either interested or ready to go in that direction. And so having, like we said, nice parameters so that students can be successful, but enough room that they can be self-directed. We can learn a lot from them. We may come in with a preconception about, you know, what we're going to talk about, and they may surprise us, and we may come out of that conversation going, wow, you know, tomorrow in class I may want to do this based on that students were making, certain interest that they demonstrated in terms of either language structures or content, things like that. And that's, I think, what a lot of this gets to is this two-way street, you know, in the conversation, not just the Latin conversation, but sort of the learning discussion about how students are learning and giving them some agency in the classroom.
I mean, I think it's very uncommon, and I got very lucky last year to have an AP student who literally came out one day and said, you know, I don't really understand, I think it was gerundives. Can we do some more work with gerundives? So, you know, then I was able to structure a couple of activities, walking around the school and finding things that were necessary to do. But that's very rare to have somebody say, I need an activity on this. So the ability to flex between what you're noticing is really key. And to be able to, I don't know, mutate the activity while you're doing it to respond is hard, but that's important.
Yeah.
Well, and these are also activities that students can do with one another without a lot of work from the teacher. And what that does is frees the teacher up to really closely observe. Right. I think, you know, we've gone back and listened to some of these podcasts that we've done, and yeah, that's a humbling experience.
And we somehow survived doing that.
Yeah. But it's like quarterbacks watching tape, right? You go back and you watch it.
Yeah.
But my point being that when you are in the conversation, you use a lot of cycles, a lot of brain cycles, focusing on what you're saying. And if you push the conversation onto the students, it frees you up to more closely observe in a way that you're not able to when you're a participant in the conversation.
But Jason, this brings up, and this is my constant question as a teacher, and both of y'all have, you know, vastly different and in some respects greater experience than I do in teaching. It constantly goes back to that how do you make the redirection? And even within, this is one thing, and I'm going to say that Justin, you especially do to me very well and very subtly, even in our conversation, even in our recordings. Last week I said mirabile auditu. And you sort of, by agreeing with me, you said, mirabile auditu. Like you were just saying, yeah, I agree with you, but you were also reminding me that it's pronounced a different way. And I picked that up immediately. And I always struggle with that when I'm with students. Do I do that with students if we're talking about what's in your sack? Do I worry about his or her pronunciation? Do I, you know what I mean? And that's tension. That's really hard.
Yeah, there's a tension there. It's a great question. It's a perennial question, like you said. There's a decent amount of research about it and some differing opinions. But I would sort of summarize those as the average student doesn't actually know that type of feedback is called a recast. And the average a student will only notice that recast or absorb that recast if they're kind of ready to already. And so I would, in class, I do that frequently, not necessarily mainly for the benefit of that one student, but for the benefit of everyone else who's listening in, so that they hear it from me correctly. But I don't view it as wanting the specific person who made me think of that type of feedback or that correction. I'm not doing it truly in hopes that they'll notice and change their ways because of what I did. So there's lots of, and we could even share
more and more input.
Yeah, if folks are interested, we can even share a link to an article or two that summarizes some views or some research on types of corrective feedback.
And so, Jason, when you're in a classroom and you're engaging in an activity like this, what's your stance or response to students? I mean, like, what are you doing when a student is explaining, for instance, what's in his sack? What is your active role?
I think a lot of the time it depends on the activity, and it depends on what my goals are for a particular activity. You know, there are definitely times where I just want them practice. And sometimes they'll come up to me, you know, like Justin said, they're going to have a sense, oftentimes better than we do, of when they're ready for something. And so when they're having they may be having a conversation in small groups around the room. And I'll just be walking around listening. I may throw in a little comment there, or I may ask a clarifying question. But a lot of the time they're going to come to me, you know, they're going to come out of their conversation. They're going to ask me a question in Latin, you know, quomodo dictor or whatever, punctum com. And I'll answer them in Latin, and then they're going to go back to their discussion. And I think that's really empowering for them to advocate for themselves, right? To identify a need that they have, a question that they have, ask for it in Latin, and then go back to their activity. I don't necessarily, like Justin says, unless I'm actively in conversation with a student, I'm not going to interrupt them to do the correction. Because that explicit correction, I don't think, is going to fix things. I might make a note. Like if I hear something over and over and over again, all right, I'm going to make a note. Okay, this is something I'm probably going to want to practice. If I hear multiple students making that same sort of mistake, we're going to do a more targeted activity on that. But sometimes they're going to make a mistake it's like it just doesn't align with my goals for that activity. So why interrupt them? Why kill the magic of these conversations that are happening in the classroom? Why put the student on the spot and raise that affective filter? You know, you just start to prioritize and get good at identifying, you know, where am I going to spend most of my energy? So there's no simple answer. It always depends on the circumstances.
No, of course.
You have to sort of develop a sense by feel of you know what needs correcting and what you can let go.
Yeah. And as with everything probably teaching related, it all comes down to your connection and probably fairly deep relationship with your students. I mean, Justin knows me now well enough for years to know that basically I want him to correct me at every turn, and we've established that over and over again. So he knows to do it. With a timid freshman or a timid seventh grader, that can be the one thing that just shuts it down and could kill the relationship if it's early in the year. You know, the scary teacher.
Absolutely. But also, I mean, the other piece of that.
Oh, go ahead, Jason.
Well, I think it's important for them, you know, there's a sense both among Latin teachers and, I mean, teachers in general, but I think especially Latin teachers, and among students, that if the sentence doesn't come out perfect, you have to go back and do it again until it's perfect. And, you know, I have a lot of really direct metacognitive discussions with students about the learning process itself. You know, we talk about when to use L1, when to use L2. Justin, I think you've got an article on this. You know, I use L1 to talk about the classroom, and it's a good chance to say, you know, you guys are going to say things, and they're not always going to be correct. In fact, a lot of the time they will be incorrect. You're going to make a lot of mistakes, and that's okay. And I think, you know, teachers who come to this approach sort of have to condition themselves to let some things go and not identify those mistakes as failures on the part of themselves or their students.
And I think that's a great point, Jason. I think another source of the fear is, I've heard people say this explicitly, and actually it comes out, even if you read like humanist Latin writers about the decisions that they were making about whether to have their students say certain things in Latin or not. There seems to have been, and I think there still is among a lot of teachers and students, this fear that the actual act of something wrong coming out of your mouth somehow solidifies that wrong thing in your brain. And that's a totally understandable fear, but it's not, to my knowledge, it's not borne out by by studies done nowadays as far as what's going to lead to the solidification of a certain form in your mind.
And anecdotally, I can't even listen. There's so many occasions where I have said something one way and been corrected, and I use different phraseology when I'm saying those things. So it's definitely something.
Yeah,
you're going to make mistakes. I mean, people change what they say in English all the time.
Yeah.
However, I think we who are trying hard to incorporate as much spoken Latin always are up against a probably what I would think is a myth. That there's this myth out there that but we don't do grammar, like because we just talk, and if it's wrong, well, it doesn't really matter. It's just as long as what's comprehensible input. As long as it's comprehensible, I think the myth is, well, it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. And that is a myth, because it's just one tool out of many to get to the end goal, which and you can argue what's the end goal of learning the language, but to be able to understand and for us to be able to read, whatever type of text you're hoping to read. I talked to Nancy Llewellyn, Anula, about this recently. There's just this y'all don't teach grammar, and it's like, well, yeah, we do teach grammar. It's just part of what we do, and it's only part of what we do. All of this is part of what we do.
Yeah, I love
one thing that comes up over and over and over again is you have English speakers who cannot talk explicitly about English grammar, but that doesn't mean that they're not speaking English, right?
Yes. Yes.
Using those, there is no communication without those grammatical rules. Those grammatical rules are the things that facilitate communication.
And this is funny, because this is ironic. I don't know how many times in my life I have said something like, well, I mean, of course the Romans didn't say things like, this is the dative or this is the genitive, like they didn't think, because that's not how we think in English. But just this morning I was reading Gellius, and he was talking about somebody's use, Varro's use of the dative and the way he spelled certain words. And it literally was like, oh my God, he's literally doing the thing that I said that these guys never do, and it was really funny. So
it is fun.
Absolutely,
there's a distinction, of course. There's a distinction, which is that Gellius and Varro talking about that is like John McWhorter talking about that on the Lexicon Valley podcast or something like that. We're talking about like professional linguists and philosophers analyzing what other professional linguists and philosophers have said about elite writers' use of the language. So they did that because like lots of people, they're interested in how the world works, and part of the world is the language. But I'm sure you're right. Well, I'm willing to guarantee it, and we can poll modern speakers of Russian and German and other case-inflected languages. No one is thinking. It's in the act of saying a sentence and in the act of answering your friend, there's no way that you're thinking of it as, do I need the dative or the genitive or whatever? But so I'm amazed actually by how many facets of our instruction this conversation has touched on, even just growing out of the what's in the bag. Do we want to briefly, in any sort of concrete, practical way, talk about the other video, the general what's in your bag show and tell thing to wrap things up here?
I was just about to come back to that.
For those who are still with us.
We talked in our last conversation. We talked about like how many videos have come out since we put that that broadcast out. And this gets to the input question. Gus, I think you said, you know, for a lot of students, like all the students have is our input, right? The input that we provide. And it's not enough. And we all have sort of like our tracks that we run in linguistically, certain things that we say over and over again, phrases that we use and things like that. And unlike modern language teachers who have this wealth of authentic material, is, you know, always a big buzzword, to draw on, we don't have that. And so having these other videos, not just the one that we did about the show and tell, but what other people have put out, it provides repetition on some of the same things. I have a book in my bag, I have a pen in my bag, you know, I have a water bottle, whatever. But also gives different pronunciations and different ways of saying the same thing, and gives students exposure to Latin that's not coming out of our mouth. And I think that's really important.
That's crucial, yeah.
I mean, I do, and I was having a conversation with John Kuhner, Capillatus Noster, about one of the problems. I mean, and this is a really big blue arrow strategic level or maybe world level problem with Latin is, you know, what Latin is being produced now. And what he meant was, you know, in 1,000 years, in that mythical 1,000 years from now, you know, what will this era of Latin be called? You know, not the Silver Age or the Augustan Age, whatever. And I'm wondering if, you know, I mean, are people really writing things in Latin? And if so, what are they writing? Yes, we've talked about novellas, but these activities theoretically are what is being produced for posterity in Latin. Like this is Latin in 2017.
True.
You know, with our French friends,
I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, with accents, with our French, you know, the gentleman who did the video, and I've forgotten his name, the French.
Renault.
Yeah, he's Belgian, but yeah, Renault Mercier. Yeah.
But you know that's a different sound of Latin than I'm doing here, or that Justin is doing, you know, than you guys are doing, and it's all good to hear.
Yeah.
Well, and Justin, this is something you touched on from when you were in Madrid. You know, we do these immersion programs, weekends and weeks here in the States, and one of the things that comes up is the communication that's happening in Latin. Is it happening truly in Latin, or is it to some extent facilitated by everybody's common language of English? Like, are we speaking in Latin, but everybody understands each other because everybody knows English? And Justin, when you were in Madrid, you know, you said that this was an opportunity for you to interact in Latin with people that you didn't have English in common with. And so this is where the rubber meets the road in terms of what we're doing, that these other videos, you know, one, it shows students the universality. Like, hey, here is somebody you've never met before who has a different cultural history than you do, has a different native language that you do. Can you understand what he's saying in Latin? You know, and like you say, Gus, you know, it gives us different ways to hear things, and are we really communicating?
Yeah.
Gentlemen, I have to go. I'm supposed to teach some people stuff about things in a few minutes. So.
Yeah.
Just put us up on the screen. We'll teach them.
No, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
I got to take off too, actually, here in a second. I got to take off too, but as far as the listeners go, I hope that if you're still with us, that we've touched on something of interest to you. Let us know either at the website,
.com.
Or is it .com in this conversation? I don't know.
I don't even know anymore.
It's always .com. Let us know there or on Facebook or Twitter if there's something about this conversation that you want us to expand on, or something that came up or you want more resources on. And we will actually continue to put out some more resources surrounding these kind of variations on what's in your bag and everyday items and things like that, which we have at least one more episode that we have planned related to that as well. But we'll put out some print resources and some other things, so be on the lookout for that. And thanks for your time.
All right. Thank you so much for watching.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. It was good to talk to y'all.
Walete.
And you guys. Walete omnes.
Walete.